All right, welcome to Laying It Out with Layman. Again, going deeper, wider, bigger, better. Creating the world, but it's not so easy. So we're gonna collectively unpack here how we imagine change, both in the sense of transformation and in money. So I wrote these articles for Tomas Bjorkman, and we had many discussions over it, and it's partly based off specific chapters in his book, but then I got to weave in some research on myth and social imaginaries and modern monetary theory. Thomas's book, of course, is The World We Create, From God to Market. So Layman, you're going to help me figure out what I wrote about and why it's good.
Yeah, when I read through it, I had a lot of interesting thoughts, and they took the form of kind of tangential questions. But I figure by trying to grapple with these questions, you might end up covering most of the content from the article. I think the first thing that stood out to me was I was reminded of Nietzsche's book, The Use and Abuse of History for Life, and where he talks about, in order to be healthy, we need to forget as much as we remember, or else we're too burdened by the past. We can't create the future in the present if we can't have done with the past. So insofar as our biological and social and psychological memories inherit the mimetic imaginaries of our ancestors, do you think we need an intentional practice or a new power of forgetting in order to give us the space we need to take us in a new direction?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word forgetting though. I think that's thin ice. And Nietzsche is an exceptional human being, so we definitely can take cues from him there. But I think your phrasing's interesting, because I think forgetting history is why we reproduce a lot of mistakes. History repeats itself. That's the problem with history. So there's this concept of agnotology, which is actually like the study of ignorance, the study of culturally produced ignorance and hidden knowledge, and kind of sociology of ignorance. And we've repressed or suppressed so much of our history, and that causes problems. So there's too much history to even know, so we have to kind of learn it and then forget a lot of the details sometimes. But I think there's still a huge knowledge gap, like we have to know our collective history better. And I think that's why Thomas wanted me to focus on those chapters, starting deep in human history, in our really mysterious origins and evolution. Like, we know a lot, but we don't know the details, and so much of that history is forgotten, and, as you say, kind of encoded in us subconsciously and genetically.
It's an interesting balance. To know history better means to know more of it, but it also means to know it with more finesse and not to be burdened by it.
Yeah.
It seems like the way you wrote the article and the way Thomas writes his pieces, it has an implicit assumption that the new collective imaginary includes a long story about the evolutionary progress of how we got here. So we have this sort of increased amount of history in the current emerging imaginary, but at the same time, there's everywhere the risk of getting overwhelmed by that. And it's not just history, like it's in the horizontal plane of the present. We're exposed to so much more data than our ancestors were, but the data can become meaningless or provoke superficial reactionism in us if we can't, maybe not forget, but bracket it, get some distance between ourselves and incoming cultural content, whether it's from the present or the past. Otherwise, where do we have the space to be co-creators of the more effective new imaginary?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, like dinosaur bones weren't discovered until like the 1800s. So it's like, people are just going about their lives for millennia. And there may have been some discoveries here and there, but it wasn't like official and canonized, and people didn't know what it was. It was more like, ooh, there be dragons in those hills.
It contains more of the past than the past did.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of human history, and I had to actually compress it even more than Thomas does, to get through the article and to get up to today. But it's essential. It's part of this idea of a meta narrative, right? And there's already lots of meta narratives out there, but with meta modernism, we're trying to rehabilitate a kind of master meta narrative, for lack of a better word. So that includes an honest kind of abstraction of our evolution, and it's a difficult thread to weave right up until the modern construction of our imaginary. But one thing I took away from it, and maybe added to it a bit, is just the continuity of history. And of course, I say in the article, there's lots of breaks, right? It's very discontinuous, but continuity in the sense that most people, they inherit language, and they do as their ancestors did. They're given culture, right? We create culture. It emerges from complex interactions, but in the first instance, it's given. So it's kind of speculative how protoculture kind of formalized in different parts of the world, in different societies, and over time that kind of combined into more complex forms, and then converged, so you have a kind of consistency of social forms. And then in different points in human history, it crystallizes and plateaus, and there's the rise and fall of civilizations, the invention of money, right? This layer of abstraction that came in many different shapes and forms, and very, very incrementally, rather than just, oh, all of a sudden we have dollars and credit. Those things are much later inventions. So Bjorkman's book is Gods of Market, and so it was clear the kind of the big picture trajectory there, and he said to me specifically, money and monetary relations. So I've been tracking this growing consensus about modern monetary theory, and it's just one piece of the puzzle, but it helps frame how we kind of, in a sense, kind of structure and stratify the economy, but also just how governments spend, right? Where that money comes from, and how the idea of balancing budgets and deficits and stuff. And so all of those assumptions get kind of thrown into question.
I love the phrase meta modern monetary theory. It's fun to say. I think, like a lot of people, I have a peripheral awareness of modern monetary theory. I've heard some very exciting claims, and I've heard some very fierce complaints. Obviously, it seems like the way that states that print their own money and make their own legislation responsibly run an economic system is fundamentally different than the instincts we get from running a domestic household monetary system. So that if we project up the instincts we get from our own lives, we end up being available to be fed a line of horse shit from people who see how the system works and skew it to the favor of themselves and their caste. So that part seems pretty straightforward to me. But beyond that, what is it? What's the proposal? I think most people aren't really clear on what modern monetary theory is suggesting we do.
Yeah, I think the basic premise is that states print money. They issue their own currency, more specifically, more accurately. And so it becomes a big lever of the economy. And I think the major fear is that too much of that leads to inflation, right? So there's still a role for economists to manage all that. But I think the basic premise, and where the debate comes in, is this idea that the government can kind of print unlimited supply of money, right? It can't go on forever, but my cat's going nuts in the background. He likes to be pet while he eats his breakfast.
Me too.
Me too. So MMT is already used, they say, when, with like stimulus packages, and a lot of that money goes to corporations, right? We saw it under Obama, and Trump is doing it too with the coronavirus relief, and it's just going to corporations mostly. And it's bailing out the private sector, in other words, which is kind of anti-people, anti-public, and this is the battle that we're fighting. So the money is already kind of just coming out of thin air. The other premise, though, and this is less examined, and I think it's a lot more difficult to unpack, but that over time, money has become more and more decoupled from the material base, right? Because of more and more layers of financial abstraction. And a lot of that goes back to the invisible hand, even, which was centuries ago. This kind of concept of the free market, just kind of generating net benefits and distributing them. So this is hard to unpack because at one time money was anchored in material things, right? We go way back. It was just a much more of a direct connection, but even I think up until the 70s, when did the gold standard end? There was a gold standard, so at least there was, again, some sort of anchorage to a material base, but through financial abstraction, it just gets more and more far removed from that, and there's speculation on speculation, and then all of a sudden you just have an economy that's very top heavy with tons of money just floating in the elite strata, or not floating. Well, some of it is being hoarded, some of it is circulating, but it's not trickling down. And when you have that, then you have an economic crisis and you have a depression because the people can't spend. And yeah, there's a basic kind of principle going back to like Henry Ford, that you want the employees to be able to afford the products that they're making, right? If they can't buy the cars, then you don't have a market for it. So we could, in a sense, just start printing trillions of dollars, and this is the trick, though. This is where it gets tricky. I advocate giving it to people in a UBI, but not just that, right? You also need investment in infrastructure, right? And then that's how you create jobs and keep people busy and rebuild the country, literally, which is what it needs. So, I think all that's obvious, but to an extent, and then it gets even more difficult when we understand how locked in we are by our present collective imaginary, which includes a large degree of capitalist realism, right? Which just like kind of drills into people the idea that we can't change the system. It's capitalism for life until death do us part.
It's always fascinated me what money is coupled or not coupled with. Right? There's the gold standard, but in the last few decades, there have been people, what are they called, ecological economists, who said that we should couple the negotiated economy to the actual ecological resources so that it doesn't become an indefinite progress at the expense of the actual resource base. I've sort of half-jokingly suggested this idea of tetrabucks, where you could couple the actual values of the currency to each of the four integral quadrants simultaneously, or something like that. And it's totally speculative, but what changes would you get in the same kind of economic model if you just got the numbers from a different place, rather than only coupling them to negotiated price exchanges? it's a fascinating area, but maybe we'll shift off that, because one of the lines you used in the article that I really liked was reclaiming abstract wealth for collective well-being. So, two-part question. What shifts in imagination are specifically required in order to reclaim abstract wealth for collective well-being? And what's the biggest obstacle to the rapid spread of that imagination shift?
Yeah, I'd say there's many layers to that. Kind of introducing MMT just on the level of the discourse, just trying to introduce what that emerging consensus is. That's a little far removed from your question. Like your question is like, what does it mean for ordinary people? What do they have to change?
What are they
And
not imagining right now that they would need to imagine, or what are they imagining now they'd have to give up imagining in order to be ready for this?
yeah, I think the second phrasing there is more helpful, because we need to let go of a lot of assumptions from the past in terms of what they need to believe in for the future. I mean, it's I say there's many layers of abstraction because it gets political. And so Stephanie Kelton, one of the major MMT scholars, was an advisor to Bernie Sanders. And so they maybe should have leaned into that a little bit more in terms of campaigning. But I guess the change people have to have is to a socialist mindset, so that they understand that that the people and the planet actually have a right to those public coffers, right, and to that spending capacity. So from budgeting and fiscal responsibility still matter, but I think just the whole structure of society down to like the tax code can be kind of reimagined. And so I think it implies many big shifts. Like, so the idea of UBI has been around for a long time. I think MMT has been around for a long time. So has UBI, so has socialism, but these things aren't the mainstream yet, or they're not fully developed or convergent enough yet. But I think that's, people need to start believing in this new set of interrelated things. And so I guess that's one answer. And that kind of leads back into what we, our communities talk about with metamodernism, and Thomas describes in his book specifically, and he calls it the metamodern thought perspective. So I think that's what he's getting at when we talk about the collective imaginary. How do we just not just teach people, but upgrade the society to that level of complexity? And there's a lot of thinking behind that, and we're continuing to unpack and develop these concepts. But I guess that's definitely a key. This metamodern thought perspective is a interrelated set of novel kind of values and perspectives to hold, so that we can have a new collective imaginary based on that, right, which considers all the lower levels and goes back to what you're saying about what do we remember, what do we forget. We're doing a huge mental leap and a lot of homework to get there, to process all that complexity, and then sort of flatten it, for lack of a better word, into a metamodern thought perspective.
So it seems to me that a metamodern thought perspective has something like a left-right polarization in it, in terms of a progressive direction where we need to invent the new imaginaries, and a kind of conservative dimension where we might need to reclaim, restore, or rehabilitate some ancient ones. And like a microcosm of that, showed up in my mind when you were writing about animism as like an early form of the collective imaginary. There's obviously a sense in which animism was crude, primitive, and very misleading way of creating social imaginaries so that we were terrorized by things that weren't there and trying to
Yeah.
change in the world by propitiating things that weren't there and couldn't accomplish those changes. But do you think there's a subset of that that's still useful? Is there a neo-animism that's useful where either subtle entities of some kind or just the notion of quasi-anthropomorphic dialogue with psychic, social, and natural features of our environment is an important thing to move forward with? Or is that all relics of a past we no longer need?
Yeah, I think the answer to that actually, which is that there's this idea from Terence McKenna of an archaic revival, and there's a contemporary psychedelic renaissance, and these things connect directly back to those that type of phenomenology. And you're right when you say, like, in the past it was this like terrifying experience potentially, right? To you see things that aren't there, and I touch on that in the articles. But now we can understand it in a different way, looking back with our technology and our wisdom, and our drugs, our psychedelics. It really helps us grok that experience and integrate it with knowledge, right? It's a very integrative experience, and you learn from it. It teaches you things. So this is part of the idea of metamodernism, is to understand those different modes, right? Or as Thomas and Hansi kind of structure it, as stages of development. And the idea of like Faustian and post-Faustian just makes me think of childhood. When you play, you imagine, you want to be heroic, and then as you grow up, you grow out of those things and you grow into modern and postmodern views. And then the 21st century kind of forces some even more complex realities upon us. It's kind of just the fractal unfolding of our development. So we want to create this new plateau that actually lifts up all 8 billion people, give or take, to a common plane of having their basic needs met. And that includes education about these worldviews, which it's a way to universalize the human experience without repressing or stripping out any of the uniqueness of people and the different cultural backgrounds. And so, yeah, through a metamodern thought perspective, we can totally integrate animism, on up through the chain of complex emergence.
Reading your article made me think a lot again about memes. I kind of recollected, I've got a lot of problems with Bill Maher, but I did enjoy
Yeah.
his film Religulous. There was an
Yeah.
interesting scene where he talks to a Muslim woman about the content of the Quran and all the negative programs that are in that book. And she sort of blinks at him because she's like, oh, we just don't pay attention to those parts. And it really put in the foreground of my mind this difference between what the program says and how we handle the program, and which one's more important in what case. Because you could say we need to get these new memes moving forward, and we need to inhibit the promulgation of negative memes like sexism and racism and things like that. But to what degree are those memes, and to what degree are they being preferenced, selected, crafted by something like a self-destructive drive in us, where we could misuse even a good meme, and we even artistically create self-destructive memes because something in us wants to wreck the system? Do you take that seriously?
Yeah, this is a good question for me, because the idea of memes, and also the invisible hand as a meme, um are things that they came up in these articles, but they also came up in my anti-intellectualism article. So I thought there was a neat parallel there as I kind of discovered that and unpacked that. And so, you know, I think it was Steve Fuller. He was criticizing, you know, memetics as a kind of anti-intellectual heuristic, kind of mental shortcut, because it led to, you know, certain types of thinking that actually, you know, reinforces just a kind of like uh, you know, kind of programmatic quality to people, and it kind of outsources the responsibility of thinking. You know, memes become these thought contagions that control masses of people, and it's, you know, I think it's true to some extent. And I think his concern was, you know, how it leads to things like the election of Donald Trump, right? Memetics gets fetishized and weaponized by people like Steve Bannon. So it is actually sort of anti-intellectual in this way, right? There's a sort of negligence and a sort of vicious abstraction and oversimplification, but you know, I think it, you know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's more complex than that. But part of the argument was that, like, you know, the invisible hand is a meme, and then this meme just spreads regardless of how, like, efficient or imperfect it actually is at the end of the day. And then that meme becomes reified and just becomes this expression that you're taught in school. And, you know, the invisible hand, everything's going to be okay. It's a like a clear kind of dogma. It's even in the term invisible hand, like you can't see it. So it's useful, but it's also misleading. um and you know, Tomas Bjorkman writes about, like, one hand to bake the cake, one hand to cut it, something like that, you know. So just kind of allude to this, there's more complex forces. And in my anti-intellectualism article, basically, I also highlight how the invisible hand, like, neglects and then quickly leads to how the financialization of wealth, even like very early on, centuries ago, starts to create market inefficiency, right? It starts to extract from the market, and you know, just it's sort of false premises in that sense. And so, you know, it's more like, you know, if we're to be more accurate descriptively, it's more like invisible tentacles of the military industrial octopus complex, than invisible hands.
Well, I can get behind that. It suits my Terrence McKenna, H.P. Lovecraft take on what comes after modernity. Invisible hand's a neat concept because I think historically it was one of the first times that people foregrounded the notion of a complex collective intelligence process. But of course, the problem with that is it then conceals any possible subdivisions within that process. Like you were saying, one hand to bake the cake, but also, you know, in developmental theory, you might say, well, there's a different hand at each stage of development, or, you know, how good a hand is it? Could it be a better hand? That kind of stuff. I'm reminded of Jean-Jacques Rousseau speculated that democratic elections represented the will of the French people, and that if you voted in a way that didn't win the election, you were simply wrong in your bet on what the will of the people was. Right? And that's a very interesting premise. And that would be true if you had a sufficiently sophisticated method for collecting and implementing generalized intelligence.
Yeah.
But if your approach isn't good enough, then whatever result, however dumb it is proclaimed to be the will of the people. And that's where it shades into survivor bias, is that whoever was able to exploit the market claims that they were essentially favored by the invisible hand and it knows what it's doing. Right? But that's only true if the system were as smart as we want it to be. It's not true if you have a dumb hand.
Yeah. And another aspect of this is coming back to me, and that's that, in the anti-intellectualism article, there's this critique, this, and a bit of quoting, but it's basically that the invisible hand is not friendly to intellectuals. Like the market, you know, the marketplace of ideas commercializes ideas and merchandises ideas. So it actually, you know, uh, they come there to die, in a sense. And so that's built in from the beginning, is like, okay, the division of labor and the invisible hand, and it helps us create more pins faster. And it's very efficient in that sense, and that's great. um but yeah, it relegates and pushes to the margins critical thinking, right? And where we do see it operating in the capitalist system, it's in the service of it usually, right? Criticism is not so monetizable, and as soon as it is, it becomes kind of co-opted, or just kind of just flattened and superficial. Like if you're just a a critic, and that's what you do, you criticize movies or whatever, that's not social critique, right? Those things are completely different. And so the critique advocates, the critical theorists and activists, are brushed aside by the invisible hand.
They get the invisible finger.
Yeah, well, exactly. And there's an image of kind of an invisible hand with a middle finger that I pulled from somewhere. And I use the metaphor like the invisible hand is paired with a hidden fist. That's the monopoly on violence that the state assumes for itself in order to protect its interests, in order to function as kind of a social organism. But in the long run, when states run into each other and they fight, and they eventually figure out that fighting is not the correct means to a peaceful ends, we just end up recreating these pathologies all throughout society. And so this is where the urgency comes from, to upgrade this thought perspective, but invest in the material foundations for that to be instantiated as soon as possible, and to emerge. It's not, I always want to kind of advocate for these things now, because it's a way to retroactively do justice to history, right? Which has this just it's like this fart cloud around us. We can't escape it, but we have to find a way to clear the air.
The fart cloud of history.
It's brutal. It's suffocating.
Sounds like something James Joyce would have said. I really am interested in what a better hand would look like. I know that a group of people can be dumber than the dumbest person in the group, or it can be smarter than the smartest person in the group, depending on the specific protocols. But that's a topic for another day, probably. We're talking about imaginaries and economics. So, what do you think is the bigger problem? The fantasy of endless growth, or the fantasy that growth should be quantitatively rather than qualitatively measured?
That's a good question. Maybe the short answer is it's both and, not either or, because those are both important. So yeah, quality over quantity. This is the irony, right? When you invest in people, right, women especially, they get better at birth control, right? And birth rates go down. As people become more affluent, birth rates go down. So there's actually a lever of positive social change that requires investing in people. It's the opposite of the profit motive. It's kind of the giving motive. And then the other thing, endless growth on a kind of finite planet, that's definitely a major kind of brainworm in our ideology, and it does relate to population growth. Not to be taboo, like, you know, I think we can feed everybody, but the issue with unchecked population growth is actually also the complexity of society stays out of our reach. It stays ahead of us, and I really think this kind of just, you know, constant changes, and you know, this, it's paradoxical because it's not easy to regulate populations. You know, you want a free society, but but you know, that's why we run up against these limits so relatively quickly, right? Like just in a matter of a few centuries, especially, we go from, like, you know, I think roughly a billion people at the dawn of the 20th century, something like that. And I know, you know, the year 2000, there was about 6 billion people on the planet, and now there's almost 8 billion just a generation later. So the exponential consumption that we're experiencing, you know, which is a large factor in the crisis, um, is, you know, they're entangled, and so you have so many people with a lower quality of life because they're all chasing this myth of quantity, right? And we actually reach a kind of level of economic development, potentially, where everybody can have their basic needs met, right? And so this is the dream, right? Everybody's basic needs met. And what happens is artificial scarcity, right? So capitalism creates artificial scarcity, which keeps people motivated to compete and consume. And so, you know, to go back to your earlier question of what is the fundamental imaginary that needs to change, it really is capitalism to post-capitalism, or, you know, a new syncretic, synthesized idea of socialism, a new normalized metamodern socialism. And, you know, this is obviously still stuck at the level of debate. You know, the culture war, you know, in many ways dances around this issue and hits it head on in terms of just pure opposition. But, you know, to go back to what we're advocating with metamodernism is a dramatic paradigm shift, but it's not going to be solved at the level of debating antiquated, polarized concepts, right? This is about the end of capitalism because it's necessarily exhausting its practical potential. And so we've got the wealth, we've got the technology to start transitioning to a more sustainable system, which means everyone's needs are met and people can think differently, right, about their own, like, wants on top of those needs, and you know, prioritize different things. And so that was a long ramble, but it leads me into what I talked to about with Zach yesterday, which was education. You know, you need a universalized, globalized education infrastructure, which is also, you know, localist and distributed. And we need it as soon as possible. So we, you know, gotta transition.
Mm. Yeah, I think a lot of people have the feeling that there needs to be a transition to a post-capitalist, or, you know, some kind of economic system update on a significant scale, but I think they have trouble imagining it in enough richness of detail that they feel like they could hold their own in an argument with someone about it. I think for a
Right.
lot of people, that's the drawback. Like, if I can't shout at somebody and make my point in a way that gets across, then maybe I should keep my mouth shut and shout at them about something simpler. But the problem of growth, I do worry about it, and I worry about the opposite as well, which is to say, I worry about people who think progress looks like pulling back. right? I've been to a lot of ecologically oriented meetings where someone will propose something like, why don't we build a desalination plant so we don't run out of fresh water? Because having the rain go into the giant bucket is a 10,000-year-old system that doesn't
Mhm.
really help us. And then people will get agitated. They say, no, we don't want to spend more. We don't want to do more. We don't want to make more changes. We don't want to have more energy. We want to pull back on everything in order to benefit the system. And that seems a little bit dangerous because it seems like, on the one hand, it doesn't grasp the principles by which you would make more of the things you want. Why don't we build more nature, get more
Yeah.
biodiversity? But on the other hand, it seems like exactly what your adversaries want you to do is think that your success is based on retreat. In the same way that the Romans were very happy for Jesus to say, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? Forgive your enemies. That's the perfect message if you're the enemies of the Christians. So there's this way of getting inside the mind of the other and convincing them that retreat is their fundamental best idealistic option. So I worry about that.
Yeah. Do you mean like degrowth? Like just the people who, would this be like a form of game denial because they don't want to build new things like desalination plants or
Yeah, it's like an
nuclear
overly
power plants?
simplistic approach to degrowth, where you think
Yeah.
basically it's just doing less of everything to fix the problem because
Right.
we're all doing too much now. There's too much, right? Maybe we should kill half the population. Maybe we should get rid of electricity. Maybe we should, all these variations of essentially a kind of self-destruct impulse masquerading as progress, when there's these other more sophisticated versions of degrowth, which are actually something more like qualitative growth, like an expansion of what we want.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to thread the needle on this, and rally all of our kind of paradigm shift ideas so they converge into kind of a epistemic singularity. And it's tricky. Like I'm all for desalinization. It seems like a very simple thing, but I guess when you get into the technology of it, it's very expensive, right? So it's why we haven't broken through. I mean, and you see like headlines of breakthroughs and stuff, but then a lot of it just turns out to be hype, and you don't really know where the technology is at the end of the day. And I used to work at a government funded hydrogen fuel cell research lab, and that technology didn't really go anywhere. I don't know where it's at today, but it was very speculative, and the government decided to invest in it as part of a kind of array of different renewable kind of projects and kind of cutting edge technology. um so we need to invest in these things, but it's also unknown. So um I'm not an engineer. Most philosophers and sociologists aren't, but you need to kind of have some trust in that process and invest in the right things. And yeah, it's both and would be an the answer again. So we need the degrowth practices and scaling down consumption and all that, but also you know we need to be realistic, and we also need to be like positively constructive. So I don't think we should ever stop building things, but we should just keep finding better ways to collect the materials, to process the materials, to recycle the materials. Like we have the answers sort of speculatively now. Like we need a closed loop materials economy, and we need it to be ethical, to the core. um and I think on some levels I think it's that simple. Like we've got our work cut out for us for the next century to kind of transition our society. And militaries are becoming obsolescent, we need to facilitate that process, because we're going to a kind of sustainable society sort of in perpetuity. And I like that phrase, and Thomas didn't like that phrase because it sort of implies a kind of static nature to the future I'm advocating, but it will also be, resilient and reflexive and iterative. So it will change. But we currently invest in a lot of just competitive and conflicting interests in industries. And I think going back to this fundamental economic paradigm shift, it means believing in a whole new set of interrelated values and quality over quantity, and higher forms of efficiency, including nuclear power, where it's safe and clean. And all these positive changes feed into each other, right? And in Hansi Freinach's sense, with the 6 forms of democracy, they interlock and reinforce each other, and you can't really have any of them missing. I suppose it's like the 6 infinity stones, and if you knock one out of the timeline, then it throws everything else into disarray.
Okay, sounds like degrowth and deep growth.
Yes, good way to kind of summarize that.
One of the things that came up in your article a bunch was the need for people to take more responsibility as creators of our collective imaginaries. And I wondered how you thought about the difference in terms of modern, postmodern, and metamodern approaches to how individuals are involved in co-creating their culture.
Yeah, I don't think I included it in the article for lack of space, but there was a part in Thomas's book where he talks about some of the meta narratives of culture. And when people decry the need for meta narratives, they often leave out a lot. There's already a lot going on. There's all the major religions, and there's all this pop culture. So we actually have quite a bit. And so Thomas mentioned things like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, like take your pick, that these things really do articulate the cultural imaginary and feed back into us. So there's always going to be lots of that. I just mentioned kind of the Marvel universe, and it's constantly being created. So how do I answer your question better than that? I mean, for part of it is, I guess, creating the conditions for people to co-create it, right? So I mean, I love the idea of lifetime education, right? And we can call it Bildung as well, which is mentioned in the article, because the work never ends, right? And it requires a little extra investment than just curricula, because we need to do this kind of soul searching and personal development, and it needs to be scaffolded. It doesn't just happen, and you shouldn't leave it to the market, because that'll just grind people down into dust. So I think that's where it connects with what Thomas is doing. We need to invest in that capacity for people to co-create. And then I love the idea of a person can only be in one place at one time. So if they're doing if they're reading a book, then they can't be out committing a crime or whatever, or like maybe they're getting into good trouble, as John Lewis would say, by reading the book. Maybe they're committing thought crime, which is a good thing. So then this is what we want, is people to co-create good culture, rather than kind of, like neo-fascism, Nazis, racism, the way these bad memes get taken back up into the system and distributed is a kind of negligence and evil, as I said to Zach yesterday, just in general, about how these bad memes proliferate. So, yeah, this is why it always comes back to, we're advocating big structural change, because then when actually you give people the capacity to co-create good things, that they'll be too busy to do bad things. Like, and we don't, when we're passive and complacent kind of consumers, we don't realize how much bad we're doing. We're not creating anything, we're just consuming, and then stuff gets created on the other end of that, but that's just like, it's just the feed tube, and then the less responsible we are to bring that word in there, right, the more it just becomes Soylent Green, just coming down that feed tube, feeding us in our fart cloud.
Okay.
We're imagining a very graphic scenario here of the trajectory of human civilization, and this is part of the collective imaginary part, and we need to imagine something much better.
Yeah, well, I think anybody who turns the news on in the last 6 months can easily imagine that we're trapped in a historically determined fart cloud. We do need to imagine the clearing. How big a problem do you think is Bouchard's level 3? Like, do you think we're making fundamentally limiting errors because of the conventional analytical categories that we try to apply? Like, where might we be wrong in terms of how we categorize the world? And is that fucking with our ability to make progress?
Yeah. Those 4 points from Bouchard, I really had to condense it. There was a lot there, but just briefly, Bouchard describes 4 levels or dimensions of collective imaginaries. The first is the unconscious, which is the psyche and the rumblings of our primal drives. The second is the cognitive substrates, which is the psychological base, programming us with these archetypal forms. So it's between animism and rationalism. And then third is kind of what you're asking about, kind of rationalism. Bouchard calls the analytical categories, where our intellectual mind separates out different categories and concepts to make sense of the world. And then the fourth is the cultural patterns. And, this is also what Marx called the superstructure. And so, yeah, they're all important, but you focus on a good one. And it makes me think of my conversation with John Vervaeke, because this is what he's really passionate about, and Grok's, kind of and we talked about a bit, kind of the relationship between cognitive abstraction and abstraction out in the world, and how that's mediated by many layers of obfuscation and, different levels of clarification. So I mean, my deep theory fundamentally is just how bad we are at abstract thinking at that level, right? Because we can do a lot with our abstraction, we can demonstrate it, but where we're negligent, where the system gets ahead of us, is with the economy and stuff, and it all just becomes too big to handle, right? And just too autonomous, really, for people to think they can make a difference in. And going back to the invisible hand heuristic as kind of an anti-intellectual kind of mistake, when we really look back on it critically, we start to understand that many of our assumptions of our collective imaginary are just outright very flawed, leaky abstractions. And so the reconstruction part of metamodernism is to finish the project of deconstruction, and then start to put it all back together, kind of from scratch. And I with John, I alluded to things like Plato, you know, the Western canon, things we base a lot of our knowledge and discourse on, you need to be able to see through it. You know, you need to be able to be, you need to be literate in it, but then you need to kind of see it as a kind of opaque, you know, pain, you know, that we have to see through, because it actually binds us to a lot of bad memes, right? Like, so there's lots of, you know, essential stuff there, like the allegory of the cave, for example. Like, you can't do away with these things, but we end up over depending on it, you know, and that, you know, it becomes reified and all these things. So that was a long way around of answering that question. Like, there's a lot of work to do to reconstruct the abstract constructs of society that actually, you know, those are our organizing principles. That's what animates us to participate, because we believe in things like countries that only exist in our kind of imaginations, and the places where we instantiate it, like borders and in media imagery and stuff like that.
Seems like there's two different sorts of improvement outcomes. Like if you look at things and go, well, maybe we're thinking of where the numbers for the money come from. Maybe that's a wrong way to think about it. Maybe we're not correct about what we think left and right mean. Maybe what we call religion is not religion at all. It's just the mythic membership approach to any phenomenon that we're
Yeah,
mad about. And religion's really some
yeah,
other thing completely, or we could be way off in how we break up the world analytically. But that leads to, on the one hand, the idea that we could replace bad software with better software that maps more correctly to the world. But on the other hand, the need for people who can critique their way through that stuff. Like, what's more important, getting better memes or getting people who have a better capacity to analyze and revalue and transcend whatever memes they have?
yeah. It's definitely both again. And I think you know, I like to kind of take craps on the idea, you know, the the kind of premises of civilization, but you know, these ideas of anti-intellectualism and dumbing down democracy. But I think if you give people the structure, that they're fundamentally good, you know. Um and so this is important, right? Because this is a kind of belief that can be proven. And so by demonstrating it, we can kind of, again, we just stop wasting time on debates and social relations that actually create problems, create tension, right? Like, crime is created in many ways, whether it's through deprivation on the poor end of the spectrum, or through just you know, shallowness and narcissism and lack of therapy on the rich end of the spectrum. You know, because there's lots of white collar crime, and you know, if you're already wealthy, you know, or in a kind of white collar position, like, why would you be motivated to, you know, just you know, steal and get rich if you didn't have some other, you know, areas lacking in your life, right? You know, so we want to give people the comprehensive support to not be inclined to engage in that kind of behavior. And this current system still rewards a lot of it, right? So you have all sorts of ghouls across the spectrum. And I love this word ghouls, because it implies that they're just the walking dead. They're just, you know, anti-humanist, hyper-capitalist kind of zombies. Um, and so, you know, they lack sociological imagination at a fundamental level. So does that kind of answer that question again?
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's interesting, you know, that the idea that people would be fundamentally good under the right conditions. suggests that we inherit some, at least potential goodness, and maybe we inherit some potential wisdom. Maybe this inheritance is largely in our subconscious intelligence at the moment and doesn't usually come to the foreground. So I guess I'm wondering, in your point of view, are we, in looking at new cultural imaginaries that are useful, does it feel like we're fundamentally, trying to make informed guesses about what the future should be? Or is it plausible that there is a layer of instinct and intuition, or privileged biological algorithms that have had a hand in the previous upgrades of our imaginaries, and which could still be an adjudicating factor in selecting healthy new adaptive reconfigurations of our imaginaries now, if we could be in contact with it better?
Yeah, the word shamanism comes to mind, and that's not a simple answer. Like I don't, I'm a mystic, not a shaman. There's a big gap there, I think. And so shamans, come from this animistic age, but they obviously, developed a kind of foresight and wisdom that carries through to today and informs us, right? So I think that kind of addresses what you're getting at. And so, a kind of contemporary shamanism is far from clear in that sense, but I'm just trying to kind of stipulate that there's a role there that was in our ancient past, and with the psychedelic renaissance, there's a continued role for it. Yeah, I don't know, it's a tough question.
Yeah, I'm definitely very partial to, let's say, the shamanic skill set. And I think that there are a lot of ways in which primitive versions of phenomenon were actually more efficient in some ways. Like if you look at a child, it doesn't have the full sophistication of the mature adult, but its rate of adopting new information and moving through developmental maturational stages is so much faster than you find in adults. A similar thing with the shaman is that they might have had access to approaches, given their knowledge of the world and their cultural knowledge base and their technological situation, of uptaking that information in a more human and more multidimensional and more healthy sense than we do at the moment. So if we could reboot that in our current circumstance, we might really have something.
Yeah, and I think we have like the mothering instinct, is very ancient, and so there's ways to nurture those principles, right? And not put the burden on women necessarily, right? But to emancipate them and to empower them to fulfill that role more effectively, and also for just us as a civilization to do that. Yeah, it's kind of stewarding and shepherding these kinds of ideas. We all will do better to take on more of that responsibility and distribute it. And so we're we're pushing for tipping points fundamentally, but there's a big unknown on the other side, and I think the powers that be, if you will, are afraid to let go because they, I mean, just in short, they can't see the metamodern thought perspective. They're kind of locked in at a lower level because of their commitments to capital.
I have a question, a curiosity around the area of imaginaries and something like psychological energy transference. And I guess I've often discussed the need for meta progressives to take the risk, among the other things they do, of going all in on the necessarily inadequate but prominent, energizing exemplars and leaders of really existing authentic progressive politics in any area, in any cycle. They're never going to be perfect, but part of what we have to do is get behind whoever's close.
Yeah.
So that could be taken as a merely tactical injunction, or it could be imbued with transference, enthusiasm. You could give a halo effect out of yourself onto that person. And we don't want to be deluded by this phenomenon, but do you think there's an important role for collective imaginary exaggeration of individuals and their significance and their importance as part of mobilization and consensus building? Should they be global
Yeah,
for us?
absolutely. And it's sort of it's tragic that we're in an attentional economy, and sometimes that brings negative attention, right? So AOC is one of the most charismatic politicians, and a few other very charismatic, very meta progressive, I would say, as you said, um, politicians got in, and now we're in another cycle, and people like Jamal Bowman, recently elected to Congress, also very charismatic, very meta progressive. And the fact that we live in an attentional economy means that, it's gamified, and these people are charismatic, and we need to advocate for them and with them on a much larger scale, because it's just so night and day, right? The person that AOC displaced was a ghoul. He wasn't contributing anything to society. He was a fake progressive. The person that Jamal Bowman displaced is a ghoul. And, Nancy Pelosi is being challenged by Shahid Buttar, and he's a great young charismatic meta progressive, right? And so the media ecosystem is so poisoned that, I was talking with Zach about this yesterday, because he's off social media, and by extension you can't track as much the different discourses and the different politics in play there. And so, he by choice kind of misses out on those developments. But that is the, contentious area. Again, going back to this idea of a marketplace of ideas, it's a battlefield. And so we have to advocate, we have to converge on these types of progressives, right? And it's not just charisma we're looking for, it's the actual substance beneath that. And you need as many of those types of people in these positions of authority and power and leverage to help redesign society, in as many positions as possible at all levels, right? And so that's what the elections of the past two presidential elections and the campaigns of Bernie Sanders were about. Not me, us. So he tried to lead a revolution. He was suppressed from many angles, but he also emphasized a lot these down ballot races, and he directly inspired people like AOC. So it is the responsibility of intellectuals to know the difference, and to advocate, right, for these types of meta progressives.
Yeah, it does seem like we need a common lexicon of luminosity in terms of individuals and ideas and skill sets and things like that. And they have to be shiny enough to get a lot of people engaged on them simultaneously. So a lot of that is about what people might call building a shared vision, which I want to say ambivalent about, but what I mean is both and. Because I see it as one method of establishing the surplus coherence, which I think is the operational function of religion. Religion facilitates and structures a gestalt that emerges when an experiential homogeneity is produced out of the currently existing diversity of genres, castes, and types of individuals in a given population and historical niche. And I think a lot of people who call themselves religious aren't actually doing that at all. And I
Yeah.
think shared social imaginaries can be the side effect of people doing things in common and building up this extra coherence, but it can also be a coordinating factor that allows them to accelerate that process. And that either way, what we need is intelligence and energy and faith that is in excess of the level that is currently plugged into the current doomed socioeconomic system. Like if we keep generating the level of shared energy and enthusiasm and ideas that we have now, it will remain plugged into the current matrix. To go to the next level of the matrix, you need to have more free energy and attention than you currently do. I think
Yeah.
shared vision is one significant tool in getting that done.
Yeah, and just to tie it to religion, because you brought it up, like, we're in a post-secular age, and what that means is that, secularization was a big part of modernity. The separation of church and state is a good thing. But that, excess of rationality and of capitalism actually kind of suppresses and co-ops the spiritual, which is an important, necessary dimension of humanity and of development. And so religion is kind of the sociological structure of spirituality. And that gets compromised through, well, I mean, it's maybe in the seeds of the seeds of the churches, but as time goes on, that it just gets you know repressed and pushed into other dark corners, right? So you have all sorts of scandals. And so the post-secular comes after the secular age, when the spiritual is rushing back in, and organized religions are clearly compromised, but they still have a institutional kind of residue and role. And so we need to learn what that means to be post-secular, right? To bring back in the spiritual and the religious. So for me, I try to simplify all these things. Like, I wasn't raised with a particular tradition. I became kind of part of the secular humanist tradition, if you will, but a post-secular implies that you can kind of hold the complexity of all world religions, right? And that it doesn't mean in a postmodern pluralist sense that it's a free-for-all, and that they can continue to evangelize and compete, which they do. What it means is that people have to be educated in all of it, right? They have to have access to all of it, and you can still go deeper into one tradition if it's closer to your family or your geographical history, but you can hold it all in your mind, right? So I can be appreciative of the value of those traditions while not committing to any particular version, and especially not being fundamentalist about any of it. So that's how we bring the spiritual back in, and also create new religion. It happens all the time. There's parody religions, there's sort of fake religions, like Jedi in Star Wars. And so it all comes back to reality, where we integrate these things, whether it's like conscious or unconscious.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that is the necessary meta level approach, and that it's based on our conscious or instinctive ability to see what's actually operating in those different systems, so that we're not appreciating just as a whole bunch of sets of different beliefs. We're appreciating them as some kind of operational process, which then also gives us an evaluation tool to look at any different part and go, oh, this part's doing it better and this part's not doing it as well.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned, I mean, modernity is interesting because it's famous for this Habermasian differentiation of values, and like you mentioned in the article, the Popperian differentiation of worlds. And there's this idea that maybe if you could integrate those parts better, then you would have a modernity that was spiritually efficacious, able to inspire faith. And probably we have seen that. I imagine that maybe that's the kind of guy Benjamin Franklin was, a transcendental modernist who brought a lot of those parts together in himself. But is it enough to reintegrate the differentiated parts of modernity, or is that always going to be insufficient and needs to be supplemented by differentiation and reintegration of pre-modern and postmodern systems as well.
Yeah, those three worlds are real, just to kind of abridge it, are the physical, social, and mental dimensions of our experience. And Tomas Bjorkman kind of picks three concepts that map to that like as attractors, these are the things that we should be focusing on, right? So he says efficiency, fairness, and meaning, right? So there's a, I don't know if this is a meta-modern idea, or maybe it's just modern, right? But it gives us some key metrics, right? And fairness and meaning are a lot more abstract, right? So we need to be careful with those. We need to be very precise because we want real justice and authentic meaning. But I think that they're good. Again, the idea might be not just the concepts, but the overlapping nature of them, the way they're interdependent, and you can't privilege one or over the other. And often in capitalism, efficiency is what gets privilege over fairness and meaning. So in the most basic sense, it comes back to the mass investment and infrastructure development to scaffold up those processes, so we can point our telescopes at those attractors and just start figuring that out, working backwards from the future, like the future attractors of those states where we have a perfectly fair, very meaningful existence. And there's these ideas that come up, whether in our conversation or with Zach yesterday, that even once you solve all the problems, there's still the kind of human condition, right? And that means that we die, we terminate. So that creates a psychological conundrum we have to come to terms with. And so there's still, a challenge to being human. And in a perverse way, that's the good news. The good news is, like, and this is why Hansi calls it relative utopia, and, so we've got these sort of, almost perfect, but necessarily imperfect answers to where we need to go as a civilization and as individuals.
This is a fascinating discussion because it's based on you riffing off Bjorkman and then me riffing off your article. And then there's a feedback loop here. The only thing that would make it more perfect is if Bjorkman watched this and provided his feedback to us.
Yeah.
Then the loop would close. But the human condition thing, that's very interesting because it introduces, I think, an ambiguity into how memes are handled, right? That some memes could be more objectively accurate and less useful for individuals to feel like it gives them meaning and brings all of their capacities together and advances them a step. So it seems like, maybe not, but it seems on the face of it that a certain degree of availability to falsehood and degenerate concepts is necessary in the system just for individuals to be able to advance in their own pathway at their own tempo.
Yeah, this triggers the idea in me of noble lies. And that's the idea that, like a founding myth of a play of something like, Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, like that these things are necessary, and that the founding myth of America, for example, manifest destiny. It's fundamentally a gross lie, but it's motivating for people, and it helps unite them. And so, especially based on that example, but just generally, I reject this notion because it becomes weaponized. very quickly. And that's not to say that there's not a role for myths and imaginaries in this sense, like believing in falsehoods, as you say. But the only way it works is if it's false, right? So you need to teach people that like what we think the truth is, right? And so they don't believe, and they become fundamentalists about these beliefs precisely because they're false. Like if you tell this tall tale of Jesus who conjured fish and bread and walked on water and healed lepers, then they're prone to all sorts of other nonsense. And this is a basic kind of modernist critique of religion. It's not even really postmodern, but but I think this is part of what metamodernism is, as distinct from these other kind of paradigms, is that we're not going to compromise on this issue of truth, right? We're going with a kind of provisional truth, and at least like there's still going to be kind of necessary healthy self-deception within that, as you say, kind of just these idea of falsehoods. But yeah, that's my back pocket answer, that kind of people need to know the difference, and then it's okay.
That means that people need to be moved through an educational system that isn't necessarily confined to schools, but which accelerates their developmental capacity to the point where they can do that, because that skill is different than the acquisition of knowledge.
Yeah.
It seems like maybe modernity has sabotaged itself by trying to do its education system on the basis of knowledge, so that you end up with a whole population of people who have received the consensus modern knowledge set, but they haven't gone through the experiences or developed the skills necessary to regenerate modernity. And so what you get is modernity's collapse into pre-modern forms of social activity, because why not? If you taught modernity as if it was pre-modern dogma, why wouldn't people regress to pre-modern dogma? If I believe the world is a sphere merely because I was told it many times at school, why wouldn't it be 50-50 to become a flat earther at this point? I was never taught to confirm that for myself, right? So there's an interesting dichotomy that plays out through every kind of educational system of skill and experience development versus a worldview, values, and knowledge development. I think we might have erred on the wrong side there.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with Hansi Freinack last night, actually, and the podcast is from 8 months ago, from a podcast called World of Wisdom, episode 66. But Hansi said exactly this, that like we're now kind of in a metamodern kind of level of complexity in the world, and most people are just educated in a modern sense, and we're not equipped. We're very ill-equipped, right? And that's why so few of us can kind of see through the matrix, right? Not to like toot our own horns, but we're working at a level where we can prove what we're trying to talk about. There's an architecture there. and yeah, Hansi just had a great kind of introduction to metamodernism and framing of these things. But that particular point stuck with me because we don't teach anything close to a metamodern kind of thought perspective or worldview. It goes up to modern, and often, especially in high school, it doesn't even teach critical thinking, let alone critical theory, right, and critical history. So it falls short of even a kind of postmodern kind of reflexive turn where people have a kind of meta perspective, right? And postmodernism meta perspective on modernism in many ways, right? And there's many fields into that topic and that question. But then the meta modern turn is an order of magnitude higher still. And yes, we need to teach that, right? And for Hansi, that includes teaching meditation, right? Making that available, creating the time and the space for that to flourish. And of course, all the other basics, a welfare state. But yeah, coming back to these articles, it's Tomas Bjorkman spends a lot of time in his book building up the evolution of human society. And we converged on this point of money and monetary theory, and part of this it culminated in kind of some MMT coverage for me. But this relates back to my critiques of other projects, right? Like my critique of Emerge, specifically what I critiqued in Bonita's articles was the kind of negligence around this topic of money and distribution, and what it actually takes to materially empower and scaffold people, right? I think there's not a lot of wiggle room on this. There's a big gap between like the kind of wishful thinking of, oh, we're gonna just have a kind of avant-garde education system for kids, so when they grow up they can be the future leaders. This is where even in our own communities the complexity is not being held. It starts to unravel, and there starts to be conflicts and cognitive dissonance and emotional blocks. So we're the meta-modern kind of vanguard, but we're still making it up as we go, in a sense, because we weren't raised in a meta-modern culture either. It didn't exist, right? And so you find the proto elements of it all over the world, of course, but particularly the Scandinavians draw attention to their example because they did figure out some things that have had a lasting kind of impact and preservation quality in the standards and humanity of society. So that is a long winding answer as well, but I think we hit some key points there.
Arguably, the school system we have now is broken up into something like developmental phases, where you might get a kind of classical education in elementary school and a modern education in high school, and an introduction to a postmodern complexity in the post-secondary system. When you think of meta-modernity, do you think of it as an additional, as post-secondary, or do you think of it as sort of replacing postmodernism as the fundamental information assumption of post-secondary education?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it recasts the entire system, right? And I think Zach would agree. He's the education expert, and I think Hansi would agree too. It's like, in my own work on abstraction, I have this idea of teaching abstraction at all levels. So you teach it at the preschool level, you teach it in kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3. And of course, at each level, it is different. It's a different level of complexity. We're going up in complexity, but you're teaching something new at all levels. And so there's a sense in which, you have this stack that, as you said, the post-secondary is kind of postmodern. And then the question is, well, do we stack meta-modern on top of that? And is that how it works? You work your way up to the heights of philosophy in that sense, but it can't be that. It can't, I mean, that can be part of it, but part of the problem we're seeing the breakdown in academia and capitalism is the over specialization into more and more nuanced nonsense that is disconnected from a meta theory or like actual progress in society. so it needs to be, top to bottom up, just full spectrum reform of education. So, again, every person has like full access and freedom from worry and want, so that they can pursue education. But yeah, I imagine, there'd be reform at all levels, in the sense that many school systems are very just degraded and just kind of counterproductive in this critical sense. Like they're just shaping consumers and half-assed citizens instead of what we need is to like really maximize the actualization of each human being.
So you think the consensus around metamodern education would be around reframing all of the phases in terms of their overall orientation, but also I imagine in terms of, like we were saying about Bouchard's level 3, in terms of what are the analytical categories that comprise the basic disciplines that schools should be teaching? Is reading, writing, arithmetic, history, is that the appropriate breakdown? Or should it involve meditation, hedonics, abstraction? What are the categories? Are we doing the categories wrong all the way through? So even when we get to a place where there's a tremendous post-secondary or just in general life openness to all these different pathways, you've already spent 20 years learning blocks of culture in the wrong way.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Like, I'd say there's value in a lot of it that it doesn't seem like there's value in. Like, and vice versa. There's no value in some of the stuff that we do. But I think, you know, a diversity of activities is key. A flexibility of it is key. So, you know, it can adapt to different people's needs. And, you know, as you know, in Canada here, like I had a pretty good public education experience, you know, because and these things evolve over time, right? Like high school didn't even exist before the 20th century. And then by the end of it, you know, we have things like a tech class, an entrepreneurship class, you know, an auto shop class, and you know, all, and you know, home economics and all these sorts of, you know, electives making their way into high school. And then, you know, you have all sorts of sports and stuff. But one thing occurred to me in high school that I was like, oh shit, this is bad. And that's when we got soft drink machines, because then you start to see this corporate imagery in the school, and it's so nonchalant, you know, so just like, oh, don't mind me, I'm just gonna hang out here. But it's this big imposing capitalist box of nightmares in a sense, right? It's just it's selling you overpriced sugar water. And you know, I recognized it in high school. I'm like, yeah, we're fucked. You know, because it's all coming undone. This isn't you know, it's not enlightened education when stuff like that is happening in the kind of background. And you know, universities as well have become increasingly corporatized. So there's a kind of selling out and offloading of the humanity of it. And again, like I say in my anti-intellectualism article, not that there was ever a golden age of anything. You know, we shouldn't romanticize the past too much, but we are in a period of decline overall, and also many advancements at the same time. You know, we need to reconcile that so that like less and less of these things are in conflict. So when we talk about reimagining and redesigning the education system, it needs to be universal, needs to be free, and the you know, it needs to be rewarding, and things like, you know, meditation have a multiplier effect. It's a very simple intervention that provokes big changes in a positive direction. So these things shouldn't be controversial. You know, we have a broad set of ideas that in the metamodern discourse we kind of agree are good things, and so that needs to be packaged into a new education paradigm. And for Zach especially, like this is the organizing principle of it all. It's a kind of pipe dream in a sense that you can base a civilization around education, but it's a pipe dream that we have to smoke and get, you know, get really high and then come back down to earth and build it.
Yeah, you need a culture of cultivation.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
interesting, this idea of it's true, you don't want to romanticize the past too much, but when you talk to people from previous generations, you get this feedback that might not be merely their generational narcissism when they say
Mm-mm.
they think the education system was functioning better before. Right? It might have been functioning better in terms of modernity successfully regenerating itself, and now it's not doing that, and its parts are just coming apart and attacking each other everywhere. So that really intrigues me, but the problem is not that modernity is pretty good when it operates at its best. The problem is that it can't keep itself operating at its best. The reason you need additional developmental stages is because the previous ones cannot ensure that they will operate in their maximally developmental and healthy mode. If they could, they would be fine, right? If we all could live in idealized archaic villages, that would be great. But archaic villages cannot make sure that they stay in their idealized form under the engagements they have with the world. They collapse, and so does modernity. It will fail. It can't keep itself healthy. It can't diagnose its own flaws. If it checks itself and says, hey, I'm still modernity, therefore things are going fine, it will steer right off the road. So you need a level on top of that, and then a level on top of that in order to have each level being meta in order to diagnose and skew the previous levels.
Yeah. And, as we know, a lot of this stuff is very complex. So there is something to be said for, working your way up to specializing in complexity, right? In whatever field or in interdisciplinarity. Um, you know, we're talking about the reform of the whole package, but also parts of that stack can be reinvented so that, so I think we just need more people doing the complex things, right? And then the average person will also be, average is kind of a misnomer here. I'm not trying to put people on levels, right? Because I just mean a layperson or the aggregate person when it comes to voting, right? Things like democracy. So you want to up level everybody so they can participate more effectively. And of course, a whole other question outside of education is all the corruption in the system, right? So we don't even have a functioning democracy because there's voter suppression and there's mass media manipulation and so on and so on, right? So, it's almost, speaking of the divergence of abstract money and material foundations, there's also a big chasm between voting and the kind of the matrix of democracy and the actual outcomes, right? So people end up voting for Donald Trump for a whole host of reasons, but none of those reasons actually lead back to what they voted for or what the world needs, right? So there's this the democratic deficit just deepens. So comes back to this project and what Thomas and I tried to converge on and interpolate here is like the grandiosity of the project, but also the concreteness of some of the policy prescriptions like modern monetary theory. And there's such a lag in the different discourses to combine and to find each other in the darkness, which is why I kind of not jump the gun. Let's clean up our language as much as possible. But let's say I put the horse back in front of the cart. I don't know, to say meta modern monetary theory. It doesn't exist yet, but it's this kind of what I tried to create in this trilogy of articles.
Oh, it's absolutely what we should be working on. The economic layout is so clearly at the root of structuring the other layouts in the system. Right? You can have a great educational system or a great political system, and if the underlying resource transfer and production system is different than that, then the underlying thing will eventually distort those other ones. So it has to be upgraded. It has to be at the next level for any of those other systems to stabilize at the next level. Otherwise, they'll just be temporary experimental achievements that fall away.
Yeah, a thought that just popped into my head too is like, somewhere in I think it's the anti-intellectualism article where I talk about the invisible hand. Maybe this is a quote I actually left out of the article, but the idea is that the founding fathers and the coiners of the invisible hand, like Adam Smith, were actually more sort of meta progressive in a kind of anachronistic way than we give them credit for, because what the research said that is that they would be appalled to see how the invisible hand unfolded, right? And so, they, and the founding fathers especially, they were kind of polymaths and stuff, and they were the very, hybridized intellectuals of their time, and there's not much like that today. So where was I going with that? Oh, I was trying to connect it to the idea of kind of the degradation or entropy of ideas and institutions, right? So that's a little bit what we've been talking about. The school system is breaking down, and these the other thought perspectives are breaking down, and the collective imaginary is fragmenting. And so the project is clear in this sense. We need to do this type of research and rebuild the collective imaginary to really be all encompassing, right? Really be definitively collective and imagined in the most positive sense possible, that it's a virtuous abstraction, that we're actually iterating towards it through the paradoxes that prevent it, and yeah, converging on a consensus, if we can, about monetary policy, about prioritizing what money gets spent on. And just, to tie back to what you've said before, just, the qualitative justice and experience of life, right? We need to water that system with the liquidity of money.
Yeah, I've been reading Francis Fukuyama's new book on the origins of political order. The End of History and the Last Man was a very interesting book, even though somewhat triumphal in its praise of the inevitable success of democratic market capitalism. But he's clearly had some time to think about why that fails, because the main thrust of the new book is political decay, right? He looks at all the stages of the evolution of the state and where it fails. And every time it fails, he says this is because the programs running the institutions were not able to adapt to the new circumstances. They became out of date. So that's fundamentally what we need, is a general software update, which I think is what this new collective imaginaries points to.
I'd like to check out that book, because that strikes me as a little bit ironic, because Fukuyama is a conservative, and he's still a conservative. He was a conservative when he wrote The End of History and when he supported the Iraq War, and then he eventually did an about face and was like, well, that was a mistake. But he's still a conservative, and conservatives conserve these traditions that contribute to that decay. So that's why it strikes me as ironic, just on the face of it, because he's somebody who has sort of been influential in metamodernism, sort of, I guess, taking a back seat, but also being involved in some of the discourses with Vermeulen and Vandenacker. So, he's aware, but it's unclear to me how he's integrating himself with that, and what the role of this new book plays, and whether it's good or bad by these standards that we're talking about. So I'm really curious.
Yeah, it's worth having a look at it, because I think that ambiguity is what gives it some richness in terms of reading it, because you're not just reading a very well-versed scholar tracking, what the Chinese did at this phase and what the Indians did
Right.
at this phase. You're hearing his argument, which is partly essentially a progressive critique, but emotionally still has that mainstream conservative think tank mentality. But you want to see the degree to which there's a progressive critique entering conservative think tank mentality. That's quite intriguing.
Right. Yeah, we'll take what we can get.
Plus, we want to know how left and right converge in meta-progressivism. So he's
Yeah.
one little piece of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's yet to be seen. I actually reached out to him a couple times, and I don't expect replies from everybody, but I tend to get replies from the people that I think will reply. A lot of academics are just very generous, and very curious. But I did not get a reply from him, and I think that speaks to my suspicions a little bit. But it's an open question. I just, because he was involved with it, I want people who use this term to come together and try to build a consensus through it, because the failure to do that clearly undermines the project in itself, right? Everybody's off doing different things. And so, I think Fukuyama is probably missing what we're talking about with modern monetary theory, and with myths and collective imaginaries. And we really, for a paradigm shift to occur, there has to be some huge tipping points, and it would be in everyone's interests to reach those tipping points before the ecological tipping points start to roll over different parts of the world with floods and fires and social unrest, as we are seeing.
Yeah, Fukuyama is very, very specialized, very narrow in what he's looking at and taking into consideration, and his mood is very different than this kind of mood. But there are some intellectual crossover points. Like I say, this notion of essentially a software upgrade that if it's not made will cause regression and breakdown. That's something that the collective imaginary and the new Fukuyama have in common. I don't know whether those two things can talk to each other.
Yeah.
Surely they're very similar.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. And these, it's a kind of conceptual metaphor, and that's the new collective imaginary is emerging. It's planetary, but it needs some fostering. It needs some TLC, and it needs some advocates, right? Which is why we're talking about it. And so perhaps that brings us close to the end of this discussion. We'll go back and forth a bit, but just try to tie it off, because we've, Thomas uses this phrase, the meandering path. And I like it, but I also criticize it, because I like the idea of straight lines, the shortest distance between 2 points. So, we have to do both. Every conversation is going to be a bit meandering, but there's a through line. And, so we can have it both ways. And so that's what I tried to kind of achieve with this article too, is, the meandering gets challenged by the boundary conditions. So it actually meanders less and less until it gets to the point.
Seems to me that the straight line has to do with the minimum collective upgrade, and the meander has to do more with people's personal experience and the unknown future of a meta-modern shift. But in terms of the couple of things that we could build consensus on, which raise the lowest level of the society to a higher floor, I think that's a pretty straight line, right? The straight line that isn't meandering, because everybody needs roughly the same things in order to initiate their own meandering quest for well-being in a reasonably secure system that's secured against known threats and the surprises of the future. So we can be we need a straight line to support the meandering.
Beautiful, beautifully said. So let me ask the audience to click that like button, click that subscribe button, share, comment, and give me your goddamn money so I can give it back. That's what all this is about. Until next time.
If he gets enough money, I'm going to take my clothes off next time.
Whatever it takes.
That's what the audience wants.